gentlemen, I welcome you all for the half-day seminar on critical issues in direct taxes. To handle this, we divide this entire half-day session into two sessions. First session will be handled by CA Narendra Jain. Second session will be handled by CA Prashant GS. Now, to handle this first session, we have an eminent speaker, none other than CA Narendra Jain. May I request Siddesh Reddy to escort the speaker onto the dais. Welcome to the okay. Mr. Narendra Jain is well known among the members, but for the benefit of new members, I will give a brief introduction of Narendra Jain. He is a BCom, FCA, CS and LLB, 5th rank in CS Inter, awarded Majumdar Silver Medal for securing highest marks in advanced company law and practice in CS final, awarded Taxman's Prize Award for securing highest marks in direct and indirect taxation, law and practice in CS final, awarded Mrs. Pankaja Rangachari SIRC Prize Award for securing highest marks in advanced company law and practice in CS final. He did his articleship in HC Kinja & Co. Now work with Ernst & Young. With this brief introduction, I present before you Mr. Narendra Jain.
Respected seniors in the profession and dear friends, good evening. The first session that I have been asked to take to deal with certain recent decisions on Section 14A, certain recent Supreme Court decisions in the context of Section 14A. 14A, which was inserted in 2001. So what we will do is, we will take a brief background or history of what the section is about and what recent decisions of Supreme Court are doing it. We have certain amendments and certain other High Court decision post the Supreme Court decision which are also very relevant that we need to consider. Almost all of us who are working in direct tax practice will be aware of disallowance that 14A, routinely the tax department does under Section 14A. Especially for dividend income. If you are running a business and you are having income under dividend, from dividends. So the tax authorities are trying to bring in Section 14A to disallow expenditure. The section is very brief. So if you see the section and the Rule 80, it is very brief. It has undergone various changes over the years. But this brief section has led to a huge amount of litigation and very innovative arguments by tax counsels at various forums. It could be the arguments of strategic investment, it could be arguments of stock in trade, where shares are held as stock in trade. It could be arguments which relate to that you will restrict the disallowance to the exempt income. And it has also led to at least 3 to 4 amendments, couple of them retrospective. So it was inserted in 2001, immediately 2002 we had an amendment, then 2006 we had an amendment. The Rule 80 was brought into 2008 and it was further amended in 2016. If you see the tax simplification, income tax simplification committee report, it says 15% of current litigation is because of only this one section, 14A. So the 15% of tax litigation is generated by one section. We can imagine what opportunities we have because of maybe the sections are not drafted properly or because of various other issues. And if you see two provisions which were inserted at that time, transfer pricing provisions and 14A, these put together, you pick up any tax journal, I am sure you will find a decision on these two sections or these two set of provisions at any point of time. Why was it inserted? It was inserted because the philosophy of income tax is always that the tax is on net income, and at the same time the exemption should be of a net income. So prior to 14A coming into picture, there were various Supreme Court decisions in the case of Rajasthan State Warehousing, in the case of Maharashtra Sugar, in the case of Indian Bank, where the question was, when there is a composite business and one business is exempt, then what about the expenditure related to that business? Can you segregate that expenditure and disallow that expenditure? If you take example of Rajasthan State Warehousing case 242 ITR 450, there was a case where the state government undertaking was doing warehousing business and had an exemption under 10 subsection 29. It also had certain streams of income which were taxable, interest income, etc. And the composite expenditure towards earning these two streams of income was there. The assessing officer did a proportionality theory, applied a proportionality theory, and restricted the deduction of expenditure only to which was taxable income, and expenditure related to exempt income were disallowed. The matter travelled up to Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court took a view that when there is a composite business, the question that we can only ask is whether the expenditure is incurred for the purpose of business. Does it satisfy the test laid down under 32-37? Does it satisfy the test of section 37(1)? And if it does satisfy the test of section 37(1), you cannot segregate that expenditure, and you need to allow that expenditure to in toto. You cannot segregate or do a proportionality theory. Same view was there in Indian Bank's case or Maharashtra Sugar case. So the legislature in its wisdom thought fit that a section should, for like 14A, should be inserted with the objective that wherever the income is exempt, an expenditure in relation to that exempt income will not be allowed as a deduction. That was the basic philosophy of section 14 capital A. If you look at the history or the cases which were there before 2001, these decisions never, those circumstances were not there in the context of dividend income. So those were more or like the exemptions which were getting under section 10 or 1029, which were an active business activity. And the exemption was given for those activities, and there was an expenditure related to those business activity. It was then claimed as a deduction against the exempt income. Expenditure was claimed against the business income which was taxable, thereby the assessee was taking double benefit. So in this context, the legislature thought that this benefit was the assessee is getting, that expenditure related to exempt income is setting it off against the income related to taxable income, that should be stopped, and the exemption should be on net income basis and taxability should be on the net income basis. The dividend 1033 has come in 2001. So at that point of time when 14 capital A was inserted, no one thought of dividend income being exempt and disallowance related to that. But today, the collateral damage of 14A has been that whenever you have a dividend income, you have a situation where there is a section 14A exemption attracted. Added to this, whenever the dividend income has been exempt, there was a situation where first it was exempt, then made taxable, again it became exempt in a span of 2 to 3 years. It was brought in with an added section 115 capital O, at least in the context of equity shares, that the company will pay dividend distribution tax and the income will be exempt in the hands of the shareholders. Now, if you look at it from the economic point of view, the income has suffered tax. There is an economic taxation of income, because at the same time, whenever there is an exemption given for dividend, the dividend distribution tax is paid by the company. So that income has suffered economic taxation. The question is whether, despite that income suffering economic taxation, would the government and revenue be right in disallowing expenditure with respect to that dividend income? 3 decisions of Supreme Court in 2018 deal with these interesting aspects. Just to give one more angle to this, there was a issuer committee on ID simplification, income tax simplification committee, which had given its report, and they had highlighted that section 14A is one of the most litigative section, and they had asked them to make certain amendments. One of the amendments that the issue committee had proposed, which obviously has not been accepted by the government, is that the dividend income which is suffering tax should be excluded from the purview of section 14 capital A by insertion of a proviso saying that these incomes should not, the 14A will not apply to these streams of income. They also brought in other streams of income like, say for example, share of profit of a partnership firm. So if a partnership firm share of profit is exempt, then any expenditure which associate has incurred for earning maybe interest for the putting the money into that or expenditure in relation to this earning of the exempt income should also not be allowed, because the partnership firm and a partner are sort of a two faces of a coin, and when the firm is taxed, partner is given exemption. But this particular suggestion was not accepted by the parliament, and though we saw an amendment in 2016 to Rule 80, that amendment is not in line with what the issue committee has suggested, but it is slightly different. This is just a brief history of what the amendment has been, and the objective was that if there is an expenditure in relation to income which is exempt, that should be disallowed. But it was never an objective that expenditure which is otherwise allowable should be disallowed. So if an expenditure which is in relation to income which is taxable, the objective of legislature is not to disallow that. But today Rule 80 and the position taken by revenue in many assessments do lead to a situation where the actual expenditure which is disallowed gets actual expenditure which is allowable gets disallowed by applying the principles of Rule 80. In fact, there could be situations, if you do a Rule 80 calculation, it could be more than the expenditure. No doubt later on they have added a provision to restrict the disallowance, that's a different issue. But this all shows the absurdity in terms of what the Rule 80 could all lead to. Just before we go into the nitty-gritty of sections, again just to highlight the history, it was inserted in 2001 with retrospective effect from 1962. And in 2002 a proviso was inserted that though it is a retrospective amendment, they will not do an reassessment under 147, though despite it being a retrospective amendment. The major amendment or the important amendment came in 2006, wherein they brought in subsection 2 and subsection 3, and that is stayed till date in the statute. So we will have an occasion to understand the subsection 2 and subsection 3. Subsection 2 and subsection 3 are the provision through which the assessing officer today gets power to apply Rule 80. So this is important that under what circumstances 14A subsection 2 and subsection 3 would trigger. If that would not trigger, the IO would not have a power to apply Rule 80. Then there was a 2008 amendment which was trying to carry forward what subsection 2 had provided, because subsection 2 had provided, 14A subsection 2 had provided that the computation will be done in accordance with the rule as may be prescribed. There was a gap between 2006, the rules were prescribed in 2008, so there is 1.5 years gap between the actual amendment and rules that were prescribed. So one of the issues before Supreme Court is whether these amendments are retrospective or prospective, whether Rule 80 is retrospective or prospective, that is one of the issues. Now that Rule 80 which was there inserted in 2008 had 3 clauses. So 3 ways or to say that the computation mechanism provided for 3 items of disallowance. So Rule 81 basically reiterated what was there in 14A2, and when you come to Rule 82, the first clause says, is there any directly incurred expenditure for earning the exempt income? So if I have borrowed money and then invested, so there is a direct nexus, so I will include that expenses for disallowance purposes. Then there was sub-rule 2 in Rule 82, which provided that if you are having interest income which is out of mixed funds, so you are having funds which is both borrowed capital and your own fund, and then this is got invested into investments which is generating exempt income, which becomes a mixed fund. So if there is a mixed fund, they gave a formula saying that interest incurred into the investment which are generating exempt income divided by total assets. This was the formula given in Rule 82 subclause 2. Then the third clause in Rule 82 provided that the 0.5% of the average annual value of the investment should be disallowed. So the disallowance under Rule 80 was the summation of these three items. That is the direct expenditure, it could be interest or it could be any other direct expenses like the expenses of treasury department of the company. Second, proportionate on interest basis, interest on proportionate basis. Third, 0.5% of the investment. Now this Rule 80 got replaced by new Rule 80 from 2016. The amendment is effective from 2/6/2016. So financial year 16-17, assessment year 17-18 onwards. Now interestingly, this amendment does not have that clause 2. It has only two clauses. It says first clause says direct expenditure incurred towards earning the exempt income, and second clause provides that 1% of monthly average balance of the income investments which are generating the exempt income. So that proportionality clause which was there in the old Rule 80, that is 2008 version, is not there in 2016 version. This is an important part which we should understand, because now the proportionality principle has been specifically excluded. So what is the effect of that? Can I say from financial year 16-17 onwards, the interest which is incurred on mixed funds will not be covered under the disallowance under 14A. This will be directly in conflict with what the Supreme Court held in Goldfarb or in the case of Maxop, which is the most important decision that we need to understand. So what would be the understanding under Maxop and under the new 2016 version of Rule 80 is important aspect that I would try to deal with. Now if you go to the section, briefly if you go to section before we move into the decisions, section provides that for the purpose of computing total income under this chapter, so whatever is the total income computed under this chapter, it applies to all heads of income. No deduction shall be allowed in respect of an expenditure incurred in relation to an income which does not form part of a total income under this Act. So it very clearly provides that if there is an income which does not form part of total income and an expenditure is incurred in relation to that income which is exempt, then the 14A1 will be applicable. The point here was, how do you interpret the term in relation to? Whether you should look at proximity between the expenditure or income, or there should be a nexus between the expenditure or income. Second, what do you look at first? Whether you look at the expenditure first or whether you look at the income first. That means I might have incurred an expenditure but I may not really have an exempt income, or the other way around, I may have an exempt income, then do I go and search for the expenditure. So this particular aspect becomes important, especially in cases where you do not really have any exempt income. Suppose I borrowed funds and invested in shares. So I am really having an interest expenditure which has direct nexus with my investment into the exempt investments which is generating exempt income. So the question is, if I do not get any dividend income in that year, can the still disallowance under 14 category be made? This is another important angle or point which needs to be kept in, which has been dealt by the Supreme Court. And now if you look at exempt income, another version that we need to keep it in mind is what happens to the recent amendments 115 BBDA, which provides that the dividend income above 10 lakhs will be taxable, and the capital gains exemption which was there under 1038, which is no more applicable for this financial year, and your income now becomes taxable either as a long-term capital gains by virtue of 112 capital A. So can I really argue that this whole purpose of debate of dividend income attracting 14A itself is lost, and by virtue of these two amendments which make it taxable, can I then say that the 14A provision should not be attracted? If I look at 115 BPDA and 1033, if we read both the provisions together, if you will find that the today dividend income is still exempt. Now contrast this with the long-term capital gain. 1038 is no more applicable at all. No doubt you get 1 lakh minimum threshold above which it is taxable. So today if I have 50,000 of long-term capital gains, that income is not taxable. It's a different issue that there is no tax charged on that income. But 1038 is itself not applicable. So you cannot say it is an income which is exempt. And when you look at dividend, 1033 still remains in statute. The proviso thereafter supplies that this subsection, this clause will not be applicable if the provisions of 115 BPDA become applicable. And if we go to 115 BPDA, it is very specifically applicable where dividend income crosses the 10 lakh threshold, not before that. So with respect to dividend income, where my dividend income is less than 10 lakh rupees, there is still a situation where the income is not forming part of total income and it is still exempt under 1033. But when it comes to long-term capital gains, that is not the case, because now 1038 itself is not applicable. Though my long-term capital gains may be less than 1 lakh rupees, it is no more that it is not part of total income. It is a different matter that the tax is levied only after 1 lakh of income. It is like our standard deductions or minimum threshold that we have in terms of 2,50,000 or other limits. So this is another important distinction that we have to keep it in mind as we proceed further for the subsequent years when these provisions become applicable. Subsection 2. Subsection 2, which is inserted in 2006. Now this subsection 2 gives power to the AO to determine what will be the expenditure that he goes to disallow as per the method as may be prescribed, which is nothing but Rule 8D. If the AO, having regard to accounts of the assessee, is not satisfied with the correctness of the claim of the assessee in respect of such expenditure in relation to income which does not form part of total income under this Act. What this means is, if the assessee today makes a claim that I have either not incurred any expenditure in relation to exempt income, which is coming under subsection 3, subsection 2 and subsection 3 will have to be read together, or the assessee makes a claim that look, my dividend income is 1 lakh rupees and I am saying that 10,000 rupees is an expenditure which I have incurred directly for this purpose of the earning this 1 lakh rupees. He makes an hypothetical disallowance. The question is, when assessee has made a suo motu disallowance in his return of income and he makes a claim that this is the expenditure which I have incurred for earning this exempt income, what is the power of the assessing officer? Subsection 2 would provide that if the assessing officer is satisfied that the assessee's claim is incorrect, that means he will have to demonstrate that the assessee's claim is incorrect, and by demonstrating that, the assessing officer has to necessarily do it with respect to the accounts of the assessee, having regard to the accounts of the assessee. There are a lot of decisions which have said that if the AO has not recorded the satisfaction in his books of account or in his assessment order, then his disallowance or his power to invoke Rule 8D is not valid, and disallowance under Rule 8D will not be attracted. So the AO needs to specifically record why does he feel that assessee's claim of incurring a particular expenditure for under 14A2 he is not satisfied with it. This should be there where assessee himself suo motu has made a disallowance. So if the assessee in his return of income can do this at whatever amount the assessee feels, it could be say salary of a treasury person or some part 10% salary of a treasury person, 10% of dividend. Some cases have taken a view that 10% of dividend is a reasonable disallowance. If the assessee has done that, then the AO, if he wants to invoke 14A2, then he needs to demonstrate that assessee's claim is not satisfied with the correctness of assessee's claim. Subsection 3 says that provisions of subsection 2 shall also apply in relation to a case where the assessee's claim that no expenditure has been incurred. So if the assessee makes a claim that I have not incurred any expenditure, then also provisions of subsection 2 will be applicable. That's why I said that subsection 2 and subsection 3 we will have to read together and try to understand that under what circumstances AO would get the power. This is again reiterated in Rule 81, which is very similar to, it's a combination of subsection 14A2 and subsection 14A3, and that is brought in Rule 81. Now look at Rule 82, because this is the computation mechanism. This is a new rule which is coming in effect from the 2016 version of Rule 80. So expenditure in relation to income which does not form part of total income shall be aggregate of the following amounts. So shall be aggregate of following amounts, namely, so it's an exhaustive list. The amount of expenditure directly relating to income which does not form part of total income. That is the first the clause there, that what is an expenditure directly relating to the income. So here, because the word directly is used, the proximate nexus will have to be demonstrated. So if there is a direct nexus that I have borrowed the funds and invested in the shares or in asset which is generating exempt income, investment which is generating exempt income, that proximate nexus has to be demonstrated. The Supreme Court in all these decisions, or at least the first one, Godrej Boyce, has very categorically stated that it will be the obligation of AO to demonstrate that there is a link or nexus or live link between the incurrence of expenditure and the exempt income. So that has to be demonstrated by assessing officer if he wants to bring something under subclause 1. That has to be done by the assessing officer, because the words which are directly relating to exempt income. So only the proximate expenses, direct expenses, nexus, the expenses which have nexus will get covered under this particular clause. Now look at the clause 2. An amount equal to 1% of annual average of the monthly average of the opening and closing balance of the value of investment, income from which does not form part of the total income. So the subclause 2, if I go back to what I said earlier, the 2008 version of Rule 80 had another subclause which provided for interest proportionate deduction. So if you have a mixed funds, you have interest incurred on that, interest incurred multiplied by the investment generating exempt income divided by total assets. Now that clause is not there. So when that clause itself is not there, can we say the Supreme Court's decision in Maxop, as we go further we will see it, which applied the proportionality theory, is no more applicable. Okay, so that is one important aspect of amendment of 2016 and its effects on the Supreme Court's decision in Maxop we will have to discuss as we go further. Now coming to the existing clause 2, it gives us the disallowance of 1% of annual average of monthly average of the opening and closing balance of investment. The rule-making body thought it fit to make it monthly average. Earlier it was yearly average. So we used to take the opening balance on 1st of April, closing balance on 31st March, divided by 2 and then multiplied by 0.5%. It was found that this is being misused and people really possibly would liquidate their funds on 30th of March and invest back on 2nd April. So you really don't have opening and closing balance and therefore there is no disallowance under particular clause. It would possibly be done now also, someone would still do it on 2nd of every month and 30th or 29th of every month, but that's a different issue. It's very interesting that in the assessments if you see, where this kind of situations are there, many of the large corporates park their funds in money market mutual funds or overnight funds where you can liquidate at an immediate basis. So they may not really have any balance at the end of the month. So the department in some of the cases will find they have used the peak investment of a month and then done the average of that. The rule does not support it, but still this is the practice in certain of cases we have seen that they use the peak investment because really there is no opening balance and no closing balance, whether you take all the 12 months. So clause 2, the computation mechanism of clause 2, subclause 2 will fail when there is no opening and closing balance. So this is subclause 2. Then there is a proviso. As I said, there were two issues which issuer committee had to deal with. One, where the exemption, the disallowance which is happening is going much higher than the dividend income or the exempt income, or second, the disallowance is much more than the expenditure incurred. Now it could happen that there is an investment company which may really not have much of an expenditure, but it may have a huge balance sheet investment. So when you apply this 1% or when you look at this 1%, the amount that you get might be more than the actual expenditure incurred by the assessee. So now that created a problem in various cases that how can the disallowance be more than the expenditure incurred by the assessee itself. And if you go back to 14.1, it very clearly said that the disallowance, no deduction is allowed in respect of expenditure incurred. There has to be first an expenditure to make a disallowance. If there is no incurrence of an expenditure, what you could disallow? So now the Rule 80, the new version of Rule 80 provides that any expenditure, the disallowance under the clauses 8D2, clause 1 and subclause 2 shall not exceed the total expenditure claimed by the assessee. Shall not exceed the total expenditure claimed by the assessee. So if I claim 100 rupees as an expenditure, my disallowance will be restricted to that 100 rupees itself. It cannot be more than that. But it does not address the second issue which we had, that if my dividend today is only 1 lakh rupees, can I disallow more than my dividend? But that issue, if we read the Maxop's decision more minutely, though that was not the question before Supreme Court, but indirectly they have confirmed that view that when the disallowance is made, it cannot exceed the dividend income. As we go further, we will look at that.
Excuse me, sir. In the previous section, in the section, provided, rule, provided that the amount referred to in clause 1 and clause 2 shall not exceed the total expenditure. Is it the total expenditure in relation to like the exempt income or like total expenditure of the creator?
Total expenditure of the assessee, claimed by the assessee.
Yeah, exactly.
So if you have an investment company, why this situation would arise? So there are a lot of large investment company. If you look at even the couple of decisions which are there at High Court or Supreme Court, when you have a large investment company, the balance sheet might be few hundreds crores, say it might be 500 crores, but there may not be any expenditure for that purposes. So if you take 1% of that 500 crores, it becomes 5 crore rupees. But expenditure incurred itself may be 3 crore rupees. So can you disallow more than that? So that was the issue, which is addressed by this proviso to Rule 82. Now this particular decision which travelled to Supreme Court, and first of sequence of 3 Supreme Court decisions, the issue here, as I first highlighted, that the economic taxation point of view, that when the today dividend income is exempt, but the corresponding company is today discharging tax on that dividend at whatever rate it may be applicable by paying dividend distribution tax. So when the shareholder receives this dividend income, though it is exempt in his hand by virtue of provisions of 1033, or it may be from mutual fund under 1034, what is the income has suffered economic taxation. Before Supreme Court, it was argued that if you look at both the provisions 115(0) and 1033, the amendment to these provisions have happened throughout the life of these provisions on a very corresponding basis. So whenever 115(0), 1033 is amended, 115(0) is amended. Whenever 115(0) is amended, 1033 is amended. So that means there is a integrated scheme of taxation to tax the dividends, move the taxation of dividend from the shareholders to the company. And it is the same dividend, the economic taxation of that dividend has happened. So when the dividend has suffered taxation in the form of DDT, should 14A be applicable to dividend income at all? That was the question which was raised before the Supreme Court. That was the first question. The second question I will come to that, but this was the most important question which the Supreme Court had raised. The Supreme Court did not go by the economic principles of taxation. They say it is suffered economic taxation. That is not relevant. We are going by the statute or literal interpretation of the section. And if we do a literal interpretation, the question that we need to ask, is there an income which is exempt? Yes, there is an income which is exempt. The dividend income is exempt today by virtue of provisions of the Act. Then, yes, then the next question is, have you incurred any expenditure in relation to this exempt income? And if you are able to, if the revenue is able to demonstrate that there is an expenditure which has been incurred in relation to this exempt income, then the disallowance under 14 capital will be attracted. Now it is taxable in the hands of company is not relevant for determining the applicability of 14A in the hands of shareholder. This is in sum and substance what the Supreme Court held. So by one, though legally, if you look at from the legal principles, this decision may be correct, but if you look at from the economic principles of taxation, this decision may not be correct. This is somewhere the legislature only will have to step in and provide that where the taxation is happening at some point of time, the economic taxation of income is happening, then we will exclude that for the purpose of 14A. This is exactly what the issuer committee, IT simplification committee had suggested, that they had prescribed certain streams of income known as dividend, share of profit, etc. that these should be specifically excluded from the taxation net or the disallowance under section 14A. If that one provision would have been accepted, possibly a huge amount of litigation that we have under 14 capital A would no more be applicable. The next issue before the Supreme Court was the interpretation of 14A2. The question was whether the revenue will have to demonstrate that there is a nexus between expenditure incurred and the exempt income. The Supreme Court said the revenue will have to prove it that there is an income which is exempt and there is an expenditure in relation to that exempt income which is incurred by the assessee. If the revenue is not able to demonstrate that, then the disallowance under 14 capital A will not be applicable. So the recording of satisfaction by the AO under 14A, what we said, that AO needs to be satisfied that assessee's claim is incorrect, whether it is assessee claims that he has incurred something or assessee claims that he has not incurred something. should naturally flow from the Supreme Court's decision in Godrej and Boyce, and we should be able to argue that if the AO has not recorded satisfaction, if the AO is not able to prove that there is a relationship between income, exempt income and the expenditure incurred, in those cases 14A disallowance should not be applicable. This is the first decision. Second decision is the SR Technologies decision, which came second in sequence. Here there was an issue in terms of interpretation of the 2006 amendment and 2008 amendment. The question before the Supreme Court was whether these two amendments, 14A2 which was inserted from 2006 and Rule 80 which was inserted from 2008, whether they are retrospective or prospective. The memorandum amending the Act did not provide that these are retrospective. They said that these provisions are prospective in the nature. But at the field level, we found that the revenue officers are taking a view that the mechanism of Rule 80, which is inserted from 2008, is also applicable to all pending assessments, all earlier assessments. So they were started making disallowance, applying Rule 80 and making it applicable for the earlier years also, the 2008 version of the Rule 80. The matter traveled to the special bench in Dhaka Capital, then to the High Court and then to the Supreme Court. The question was whether these amendments can be retrospective or prospective. The Supreme Court in very clear terms said this is a fiscal statute and any amendment which is casting this extra liability cannot be held to be retrospective in nature. They again laid down the same principle what we had in Vatika Township Supreme Court, where it was dealing with block assessment and proviso thereunder, the surcharge whether applicable retrospective or prospective. So applying the same principle what was there in Vatika Township, the Supreme Court said that in these two amendments are not retrospective and they will apply prospective. Now that would mean that all the earlier years prior to 2008, if any assessments are pending or matters have been remanded back by the tribunal, in all those cases, the AO will have to make a disallowance under 14 capital A1 without recourse to proportionality theory which is there in Rule 80. So that means he'll have to, if we go back to 14A, he will have to demonstrate that what is an expenditure. He'll have to pinpoint what is an expenditure. He cannot just take the investment and apply a ratio. That would no more be applicable. Another interesting argument which was made by the counsels arguing this particular matter, that if you say 2008 amendment is retrospective, what about 2016 amendment? That also should be retrospective. Then which provision you will apply at the practical level, at the field level? So even if there is a 2016 version of Rule 80, why don't you think that is also retrospective in nature? So Supreme Court said, no, this will not be retrospective in nature. This will be prospective and be applicable for respective years. Now we come to the most important decision, and which possibly we try to spend some time on this. And this is one decision which, as I said, 2016 version of Rule 80 would have an impact on this decision, and various arguments that we made. Now, a couple of arguments which the assessees have been taking before the tribunal or high courts is, when you are making disallowance under 14A, the disallowance do not apply to strategic investments. So when I make a strategic investment, the idea is to have controlling stake in the subsidiary. My intention is not to earn the dividend income. The dividend income is earned as an ancillary. It is just coming along with the main activity. So my objective is to hold the subsidiary, have a controlling stake in the subsidiary and get business benefits out of that investment into shares. So, you look at my predominant purpose. What is my predominant purpose? My predominant purpose is investing for getting controlling stake and business activity and not earning dividend income. And when my predominant purpose is not dividend income, the disallowance under 48(1) should not be applicable. This was where I had 51% holding. If we came before 51, there were decisions where we argued that I am associate, JV company, there is a business relationship, there is a commercial benefit that I am getting. Therefore, do not apply the provisions of 14 capital A1. This was one leg of arguments. In fact, accepted in various decisions. As we go further, we will see what is the Supreme Court's interpretation of that. But there was another angle that was also argued before Supreme Court, and there were a set of cases because there is a batch of appeals. Another batch of appeal dealt with the cases where the assessee was having shares or held shares as stock in trade. Now when you are holding the shares as stock in trade, you are really getting the business income out of it, which is taxable and which is not generating any exempt income. The Karnataka High Court in CCI's decision and various other decisions was there, where the question was where I hold the shares as stock in trade. And another important decision is Punjab and Haryana High Court in State Bank of Patiala, which has been considered by Supreme Court in the Maxops case. The question is, where I am holding as stock in trade, what is my objective? Again, what is my dominant objective or predominant objective? Is to hold the shares. If I get a profit, if I get a good price, I am going to sell these shares and generate taxable income. When I am holding the shares as stock in trade, whether it is short term, long term would all not make a difference, because I am going to offer that income as business income. The dividend which comes is only ancillary to my main objective. It is not my predominant objective. The Supreme Court, the Karnataka High Court in CCI accepted this version and said that if you held the shares as stock in trade, then the disallowance under 14A1 will not be applied. Similar was the case before the Punjab and Haryana High Court in State Bank of Patiala, where there was a bank which was doing the trading in share activity, and it had to also hold investments because of the regulatory requirements. It had to hold certain investments because of regulatory requirements. The assessee before Punjab and Haryana High Court said that, look, I am a bank, this is my activity, this is a business income, and Supreme Court in Narendra J Jain's case has accepted that this is a business activity and you cannot take it under other sources or different heads. The board subsequently had also clarified that banks doing this activity, cooperative banks or regular banks, the income will be classified as profits and gains of business or profession. So when my income itself is business income, how can you do a disallowance under the section 14A1, because my objective is not to earn dividend income, and what is exempt is dividend income, but the gains are anyway taxable. That was second set of issue before the Supreme Court. The State Bank of Patiala also had a very interesting issue. It earned X amount as dividend, let's say 100 rupees. The assessing officer calculated Rule 80, which is coming more than 100. But the assessing officer was benevolent of his assessing officer. He restricted the disallowance to the 100 rupees itself. The matter traveled to CIT appeals. CIT appeals possibly was more far-sighted, because the recent circular has come now that if you make enhancement, you will get additional points in promotions, etc. No doubt it is challenged in Delhi High Court and Bombay High Court. But the CIT appeal said, no, you cannot restrict. There is no provision to restrict the disallowance to the exempt income only, and I will go by the calculation. If the calculation is coming more than your 100 rupees of dividend, if it is coming 200 rupees, I will disallow 200 rupees. So he may enhance the disallowance. Matter traveled to tribunal. Tribunal said that disallowance cannot be more than exempt income, and taking recourse to the stock in trade theory, they deleted the disallowance. Matter traveled to High Court by Revenue's appeal, and Revenue upheld the tribunal's order, and then it went to the Supreme Court, and Supreme Court had also to deal with it. So third issue, that is interesting issue, that in the Maxops decision is that where I am having exempt income of say 100, can the disallowance be more than 100? And if I extend the logic here, if I do not have an exempt income, can there be a disallowance under 14A account? Or by applying the Maxops decision, I will still do a disallowance. If you look at each of these issues, the first issue is the dominant theory or predominant purpose theory. What is my objective of investing? Whether it is coming out anywhere from section. Does section say that you look at your purpose of investment? If I literally read the section, we have gone through the section in Rule 80. Does this theory of stock in trade anywhere come in? This is all a judicial view of the existing law. Right? So the section or the rule really does not make any distinction between an asset which is held as stock in trade or which is held as strategic investment, which is held as for investment in associates or JVs. That distinction is never made. The Supreme Court said, it went back to what the Godrej and Boyd said or the Walford's decision said, that the question is whether there is an exempt income. Have you earned an exempt income? You are into trading of shares which generates business income, no doubt it is taxable, but it also generates dividend income. It might be incidental, that's a different issue, but it is generating income, and that income is still exempt under the the provisions of section 10. So that does not form part of total income. And if this condition is satisfied, then the 14A is applicable. The dominant theory or predominant theory is nowhere provided in the statute. So you cannot apply this theory for classification of assets into different streams, that it is dominant or predominant or stock in trade is not stock in trade. That cannot be accepted. So the main argument that Tasasi had, that when I am looking at predominant theory and my purpose is to not earn exempt dividend income, but purpose is either the business objective or to earn gain out of selling of the shares and offer it as business income, that is not a relevant consideration while deciding the applicability of 14A. Supreme Court categorically held this. So now, by virtue of this, by virtue of this decision, the applicability of 14A will also be attracted in cases which are in the where the assessee is doing stock in trade or the investment is in the strategic investment sort of thing. So it leads now to the next aspect of it, the proportionality theory. Can you do a proportional? Can you then do a proportion of disallowance which is there? In the beginning, we saw that prior to 2001. There was no proportionality theory. If it is a composite business, and given that there was no computation mechanism to identify what is related to exempt income and what is related to taxable income, and if the expenditure satisfied the test of 37, it is an allowable expenditure. But now Rule 80 very specifically provided that you will calculate the disallowance based on certain formula. You will calculate the disallowance based on certain formula. So that formula, especially Rule 82 clause 2, subclause 2, very clearly provides that you will apply the formula as it stood that point of time. These decisions are prior to 2016 amendment. So as it stood at that point of time, the proportionality theory, that is interest multiplied by investment giving exempt income divided by total asset, that is there. So Supreme Court said the proportionality theory will be applicable. So they negated assessee's argument on dominant theory, that it is stock in trade or strategic investment, etc., etc. And they upheld revenues theory, their proportionality disallowance should be applicable. So these both arguments are now against the assessee. Both of these arguments have gone against the assessee. That any cases now if you have dividend income or any other exempt income, now you look at this situation, you get share of profit which is exempt, and the AO may start disallowing something, some expenditure because of that. If you are having certain other proprietary concern or something else also. It has happened, in fact, in certain cases we have seen this kind of disallowance. For partner share of profit, the disallowance in 14 capital A has been made. So these two main arguments which had that strategic investment, stock in trade, that had been negated by Supreme Court and said that we don't find any such reasoning in the section of rules and therefore that argument will not hold good. Coming to the third point, the question was State Bank of Patela. If you go back to what we discussed, the AO calculated at X, the CIT enhanced it, which became more than the exempt income itself. In ITAT deleted that point, matter traveled to the Supreme Court. Now the Supreme Court said that to that extent, though we do not agree with the Punjab and Haryana High Court's decision of dominant theory, but to the extent of their decision that the disallowance cannot be more than exempt income, we feel that the decision is correct. And they say disallowance will not exceed though not stated in so many words, but if they are accepting the view of Punjab and Haryana High Court in State Bank of Patela, that would mean that the disallowance today cannot be more than exempt income. Now again, this is not provided anywhere in the section, whether 14A or Rule 80, the disallowance will not exceed the exempt income. What is provided in 2016 version of rule is that the disallowance will not exceed the expenditure incurred by the assessee. It doesn't say disallowance will not exceed the exempt income. But still Supreme Court thought that this particular part, that the dividend income, the disallowance cannot exceed the exempt income, that which was held by Supreme Court, the Punjab and Haryana High Court in State Bank of Patela was correct view, and the CIT's action of enhancement is unjustified. So at least one relief that comes to us is that disallowance cannot be more than the dividend income. Now let's extend this. What if there is no dividend income? Can I say that 14A is not applicable because there is no dividend income? The natural contrary of Supreme Court's decision is that if disallowance cannot be more than exempt income, that means in the circumstances that I don't have an exempt income, there should be no disallowance, right? The Delhi High Court, subsequent to the Supreme Court's decision in Maxwell, was dealing with the case of McDowell's case. Now, in McDowell's case, there is McDonald's case. The assessee did not have any exempt income, and the assessing officer had made a disallowance under 14A despite there being no exempt income. The Delhi High Court has been consistently taken a view that if there is no exempt income, no disallowance to be made. That their decision is a Holcim. There was a decision in the case of a joint investment and various other decisions. We had Gujarat High Court decision which was in assessee's favor, and various other decisions which is in assessee's favor, which very clearly said that if there is no exempt income, 14 capital A is not applicable. Now, keeping this in view, when the matter came up before the Delhi High Court in McDonald's case, the question was whether the Maxwell ruling will mean that the proportionality theory will be applicable, and even if there is no exempt income, the disallowance under 14A should be done. The Supreme Court went to the Delhi High Court went to the decision of Supreme Court in Maxwell, discussed those aspects. Then it discussed its own decisions, Delhi High Court's earlier decision of Holcim and joint investment, and also discussed the decision of statement of in the statement of Patiala Punjab and Haryana High Court, and the language used in para 39 of the Supreme Court's decision that the CIT appeals enhancement is unjustified. That's the word which the statement which the Supreme Court has made. Looking at all these parameters, looking at all these aspects, the Delhi High Court took a view that when there is no 14A, no income which is exempt under 14A, the disallowance under 14A will not be accepted. So if you go back to the first thing that we discussed in the beginning, whether 14A you need to look at income which is exempt, or you need to look at an expenditure which you have incurred, whether there is an income exempt or not. So if we read all this decision together, possibly we can draw an inference that first you need to see whether there is an income which is exempt. If there is no income which is exempt, then 14A applicability itself is barred. And not the other way around, that you look at every case that there is an expenditure incurred in relation to exempt income, whether there is an exempt income or not. That principle may not be correct. Applying the Supreme Court decision in Maxwell and applying the Delhi High Court in McDonald, we can take a view that you need to really look at what is the exemption, whether there is an income which is exempt, and if there is no income which is exempt, then 14A disallowance should not be attracted. This is an important point we can draw from the Maxwell's decision. So, three principles possibly from Supreme Court's decision. One, the dominant theory is not relevant. Being in stock in trade or investment or joint investment or strategic investment is not relevant. And third, that if we are able to demonstrate that, or at least it should be restricted to the exempt income, or if there is no exempt income, the disallowance under 14 capital A should not be applicable. Now we come back to our Rule 80. Now if you see Rule 80, the 2016 version, today does not provide for proportionate interest disallowance. The clause 1 says direct expenditure incurred. Clause 2 says that 1% of average value of monthly average of annual average of monthly average. It doesn't apply the 2008 version of disallowance of interest, where we had a very specific saying that if you cannot identify interest expenditure for a particular investment, the funds for, you cannot trace it to the particular investment, then you take the proportionality theory, you say interest expenditure incurred multiplied by the investment which is generating the exempt income divided by the total investments. So that not being in Rule 282, for whatever reason they have amended, we don't know why they have amended. There is no explanatory memorandum to amend the rules, you get only for the Act. So whatever may be the reason, now it doesn't mean. So can we argue that the proportionality theory which is accepted by Supreme Court in Maxwell is done away with the amendment to Rule 80? Because now there is no computation mechanism in case of mixed funds. There is no computation mechanism in case of mixed funds. When there are mixed funds, so I am having my own funds and I am having funds which are borrowed, and these two funds are mingled and mixed, and then an investment is made. When there is a direct link, it may be difficult because I will say that this is borrowed and next few days I have made investment into the investments which is generating exempt income. Then it might be very difficult because there is a direct nexus. So that will fall in the first clause itself. Expenditure, so I have paid the interest on that loan, then it falls in the expenditure directly incurred in relation to exempt income. But where they are mixed, so I have borrowed, say, in the beginning of the year, I utilized for various business purposes. At the year end, I make a strategic investment or I make an investment in associate, etc. And that generates a dividend income. Can I say that it will not be applicable? Can I now say that disallowance under 14 capital A will not be applicable because there is no computation mechanism to capture this kind of mixed funds. We always have using other arguments that if my own funds are more than the investments, no disallowance of interest should be made. Bombay High Court, Reliance Utilities and other cases have accepted this argument that if your investment, if your own funds are more than the investment which are generating exempt income, Reliance Utilities, Bombay High Court very clearly said, or Reliance Capital very clearly said that the disallowance under 14A is not applicable. But the Supreme Court said proportionality principle has to be applied. Now how these two have to be viewed together with the 2016 version of Rule 80. My view would be that when the computation mechanism itself has changed, the proportionality theory which the Supreme Court brought in into Maxwell is to some extent diluted by the 2016 version of Rule 80. Now if the revenue wants to disallow this expenditure, if the revenue thinks that they want to disallow this expenditure and incurred an interest expenditure, they'll have to go back to 36(1)(3) and not do a disallowance under 14 capital A which they were doing. Prior to this, they had two provisions to disallow that interest expenditure. They could have done it under 14A by applying Rule 80. They could have done it under 36(1)(3) saying that it is not incurred for the purpose of business. But now, when the proportionality theory is not more there in Rule 82, the revenue will not be able to argue that you do a computation on the old formula. That formula has been specifically omitted, and when that formula has been specifically omitted, you cannot apply that formula to the 2016 version of Rule 80. So then I need to go back to 36(1)(3). Both these provisions will have to be understood together. Can I then say my investment into these strategic investment or others is for the purpose of is covered under 36(1)(3) and I should get a deduction. We have the famous two Supreme Court decisions, SA Builder, Commercial Expediency and the Hero Cycles. These decisions dealt with the situation where the investment was made into subsidiaries or associates. Hero Cycles also had a situation where the loan was given to directors. The loan was borrowed at 18%, but it was given to at 10% to the directors. And that 10%, the differential perquisite calculation also was done, whatever was that perquisite calculation. The question was, can I disallow this additional 8% in the hands of company? Plus, where the loan was taken and given to system cousin either interest free or either it was given as an equity investment into the subsidiary, associate company, joint venture companies. The question Supreme Court said is, is there a commercial nexus in your investment? Is there a nexus for your investment in your business? If you are able to demonstrate that there is a nexus in your investment and in your business, and that commercial expediency test is satisfied, in that cases 36(1)(3) will not be applicable. In both these decisions where interest paid funds are utilized for interest-free loans or are used for investment in shares or other activities, the Supreme Court has accepted and allowed the deduction and disallowed the 36(1)(3) disallowance made by the assessing officer. So I would possibly go back to those arguments what were there before Supreme Court in SA Builders and Hero Cycles. I will try to demonstrate that this investment which was made by the assessee into these associates or joint venture companies or interest-free loan given to the associates was with the purpose of furthering my business investment or my business objective, and it is helping me indirectly in my business objective. If I am able to demonstrate that nexus theory between my investment and my business, then the principle laid down by Supreme Court in SA Builders and the Hero Cycles should safeguard me and provide me that the disallowance of interest under 36(1)(3) will not be applicable. So, with 2016 version of Rule 80 and 36(1)(3's interpretation given by Supreme Court in SA Builder and Hero Cycles, you would possibly be able to dilute the impact of Maxop's decision, which is otherwise very high. So otherwise, if I do not have these the new version of Rule 80 and the 3613 interpretation of Supreme Court, in every case I have a dividend income, the disallowance of interest or other expenditure will happen by virtue of Supreme Court's decision in Maxop. Because all my arguments of dominant theory, stock in trade, investment, all have been through and through rejected by the Supreme Court in Maxop. And in those circumstances, we will not be able to say that disallowance under 14A should not be attracted. So, to dilute that impact, we'll have to go back to the 2016 version of Rule 80. No doubt it will be applicable to 2016 onwards only. We cannot apply it for the earlier years. And we'll have to go to 3613, saying that the removal of here possibly was from the objective of streamlining the provision. Otherwise, the revenue before this amendment had 2016 Rule 80 amendment has the power under two provisions, 14A as well as 3613. Now they are restricting to only 3613 and they are bringing the 14A back to what it was originally meant for. So we should possibly be able to argue, no doubt these will have to travel against Supreme Court. Maybe after 15 years we will find it, because 2001 to 2018 it has taken 15 years for Supreme Court to give interpretation of the basic provisions. So same way another 10 years down the line we will have an understanding that this amendment to Rule 80, whether the proportionality theory which the Maxop has brought in by interpreting the Rule 82, whether it is diluted, it dies, or it still survives. But possible for us to argue that applying this thing read with 3613, we should be able to argue that the 14A will not apply in case of mixed funds. Anyone has any thoughts or any questions we can take on this interpretation of Maxop?
Sir, Rule 80 says that, where the assessing officer, the onus of proving that, the correctness of the claim is on the assessing officer. So he will do some frivolous thing, like say he'll tell, even salaries are there. Some portion of that salary is meant for, investing. I mean, they are doing the work of investing also, and he makes an addition.
So when you are looking at this direct expenditure, the question is whether this kind of expenditure will come under direct expenditure. So if you see some of the decided cases, you will find that they have asked what is the frequency of investment, what is the frequency of churning the portfolio, are you doing regular purchase and sale, or it is a strategic investment where there is no single transaction during the year. So where there is no single transaction during the year, which is there throughout the year, then you cannot start and say I will disallow the salaries. But where you are doing churning of portfolio on regular basis, you are making an investment, withdrawing it, again investing it, especially in liquid funds, many of the corporates park their surplus funds for say 7-day period, 15-day period, in which there could be involvement of human decision making. In those cases, there could be possibility to say that salary expenditure which is incurred by the Treasury Department, some portion of it, may not be entire portion of it, some portion of this could be falling within the first clause direct expenditure. But in cases where there is no churning of portfolio, where there is a, say, most of the strategic investment or those cases, in those cases you could not possibly make a disallowance of salary expenditure.
Then in that case, he will resort to this, second.
Yeah.
Then he will resort to it.
You will resort to the second.
Yeah. So obviously, the first rule doesn't make any sense. So invariably, he will resort to second rule.
Yes, he will try to capture it in the clause 2. He will try to capture it in the clause 2, 1% of the value of annual value of the monthly average of annual value.
If I have a dividend income, 1% out of, that's it.
Yeah. Not of dividend income. I mean, he is going to disallow of the investment 1% of the difference.
1% of the
investment.
Yeah.
So in some cases it could be pretty high.
Yes.
And they have possibly understood that people were not keeping the closing balance and opening balance, so they have now done it monthly balance. And if we see some of the orders passed, as I said, that they are using the peak investment case. So what is the peak investment during the month? They are taking that and making the disallowance, because they realize that month end also people may have liquidated the funds for payment of salary or other things, and really there may not be any opening balance and closing balance to apply computation to. Now if we read the subclause 82.2, they are said very clearly opening and closing balance. Now can the AO bring in the peak investment principle? I would again doubt, because there is a very specific language used that you will take average of opening and closing balance, and that peak investment principle itself is not there in the rule, because they had an occasion to this and do a proper amendment in 2016. When they have not done that, you cannot then say that I will use a different methodology than what is prescribed under Rule 80.2.2. Just certain examples to summarize what we have understood from these decisions, so that we translate that into a proper number, and certain additional issues which are not addressed by the Supreme Court decision. There are a lot of other issues which are not addressed by Supreme Court decision. If you just take that delimited invested in say 1 lakh rupees and where it is sourced from borrowed funds, and during the year it earns dividend income of 1000, incurs expenditure of 2000. So if I take this, now there is a direct nexus. So I would say Rule 82 clause 1, which says direct expenditure, will be attracted in my case. There is a direct expenditure. We are not talking of mixed funds or my own funds or anything. The assessee or the revenue is able to trace the link of investment that it is coming from the borrowed funds. Only point then would be where my dividend is 1000 rupees, but my expenditure is 2000 rupees. Can I restrict to 1000 rupees? Now, if you go back to the State Bank of Patiala's decision, Punjab and Haryana High Court's decision in the case of State Bank of Patiala, which was accepted by Supreme Court, and Supreme Court said that CIT, that means action of enhancing and disallowing more than the interest exempt income is not proper. Applying that principle, you would be able to argue that disallowance should be restricted to 1000 rupees. If there was no exempt income at all, then the state, the Delhi High Court decision, what we discussed in McDonald's case, which reiterated the principle of Maxop's case, and which in fact McDonald discusses all the decisions. So it is even discussing the Supreme Court's decision in Maxop. To that extent, it is a good point for us that this is the decision post Maxop, because otherwise the revenue would then say that even if there is no exempt income, I am going to make a disallowance. So to that extent, you would be able to argue that if there is no exempt income, then the disallowance under section 14 capital A will not be applicable. Next, if we look at that there is an investment in equity shares of 1 lakh rupees and sourced from both owned funds and borrowed funds. Now here we are talking of the situation where there are mixed funds. Now mixed funds can arise under various circumstances. There could be a smart assessee who borrows not immediately before investment but borrows 4 months before the investment. Then mix up and mingle the funds and then say that are really not, it is out of mixed funds. Or there could be borrowed funds which is coming historically, and then a new investment is made, which is a combination of borrowed funds and the existing owned funds. The two arguments that we can make here is that when my owned funds are more than the investment value, applying Bombay High Court in Reliance, there should not be any disallowance under section 14 capital A. That is one argument that we can bring in, accepted by Bombay High Court. Naturally, this Bombay High Court's decision will travel to Supreme Court. Maybe year or so we may have a Supreme Court decision which deals with this aspect more detailed in a detailed manner. Second, if we are dealing with the situation which we are currently there, in 2016 version of Rule 80, we should be able to argue that there is no proportionality principle in Rule 82. Therefore, you cannot make a disallowance applying Rule 80. And given that there is no direct nexus between my borrower and investment, the Rule 82.1 will not be applicable, and Rule 82 is anyway 1% of investment value. So this would put the possible resolution of the situation what we have in the second scenario. There is a third angle which we could bring in, that when I am calculating this investment value, how do I calculate it? So if I am having 1 lakh of funds and 50,000 is into liquid mutual funds on which dividend earned is exempt, and balance is 50,000 in debt funds growth which is not generating any exempt income, and if my exempt income is 4,000 rupees, what would be the base? We have to take 1% of a base of the annual value of investment, monthly average of annual value of investment. Should I take only 50,000 or should I take 1 lakh? So if you look at the rule itself, it gives us insight which will very clearly provide that you are going to look at 1% of annual average of monthly average of opening and closing balance balance of the value of investment, income from which, so which does not form part of the total income from which, so it should be from an investment, the income should be exempt. Only that income, that investment will go to form the base for calculating 1%. This again gives a couple of interesting situations. Suppose I have 10 lakhs of investment during the year. Out of these 10 lakhs, all are giving me dividend income which is exempt. So I have, say for example, shares, mutual funds, etc. in this 10 lakh of portfolio, which is giving me income which is exempt. But out of this 10 lakh, only 5 lakhs of investments have given me investments or dividend of 10,000 or 15,000 or 20,000. So when I calculate 1%, should I take the entire investment or should I only take the investment of one which has really generated exempt income during the year? I hope I conveyed the issue. So I am having 10 lakh of investment, all those 10 lakhs no doubt give me exempt income. But during the year only 5 lakh has given me exempt income. So should I take a base of 10 lakh or should I take a base of 5 lakh?
5 lakhs.
This is again dealt, but no doubt Maxop doesn't deal with it. Now if you read rule 80 very carefully and apply the principles that we have to calculate it for that assessment year, it says an amount of 1% of annual value, annual average of monthly average of opening and closing balance of investment, income from which does not form part of total income. So if I go out to my first argument in the beginning, that what do you have to look at? You have to look at income and then you have to calculate expenditure, and not the other way around, that first I will calculate expenditure and then look at income. So when these 5 lakh of investment have not given me exempt incomes, then do I consider it as a part of base? There is a couple of interesting decisions, and the theory which the tribunals have accepted is that this investment is today generating exempt income. Next year it may become taxable. So how do you say it is generating exempt income? It is not generating any exempt income in the current year. So you look at the year, that's all. And if in that year, which is the investment which has generated exempt income, only that take as a base for calculating 0.5% or 1%. So if you go back to my example, it will be only 5 lakh rupees and not 10 lakh rupees. And this has been accepted in various cases. Various tribunals have said that only those incomes or those investments which are generating your exempt income, take it for calculating of 0.5% in the old rule 80 and 1% in the new rule 80. The same way you will exclude your foreign subsidiaries because those dividends are taxable, and whichever has not generated exempt income during the year, you should be possible to exclude that based on the interpretation of rule 80 and what interpretation is accepted by tribunals in various cases, saying that these shares or these mutual funds may become taxable tomorrow, which is the reality today because LTCG is taxable, your dividend income about 10 lakh is taxable by applying 115 BPDA. So we should be able to argue that only those which are giving me exempt income during the year under consideration, only those I will consider for the purpose of calculation. Then what would be the implication if S disallows in the return? Should I disallow for MAT calculation also? Should we disallow for MAT calculation also? Under 115 JB book profit calculation, we need to say income which is exempt is excluded, and when you are doing an addition, expenditure in relation to that exempt income also has to be excluded from the book profit calculation. So both the plus and minus has been prescribed. So do I apply the same logic of 14A computation for the purpose of MAT disallowance also? Or there do I say that 14A is only for calculating income, because if you see where you calculate the total income under this head, the opening words of 14 capital A, that the 14 capital A 1, the opening word says that while you calculating total income under this chapter, the MAT computation you are not doing under this computation, it is a separate computation under 115 JB there. So can I say 14A disallowance need not be added back for the purpose of computation under MAT computation, book profit calculation. If the figures are big, this figure would be very large amount and it would make a very large difference. The special bench in Virit Investments took a view that where the MAT is there, the rule 80 calculation will not be applicable for MAT computation purposes. So when you are doing a book profit calculation, the special bench of tribunal in Verite Investments took a view that that calculation of 80 is restricted to normal income computation, that you cannot extrapolate it and impose it for MAT calculation purposes. So the revenue would possibly not be able to directly take the same figure which he arrives under Rule 80 and add it while doing the MAT calculation. But you look at it from the perspective of the assessee, where assessee has either made a suo motu disallowance or assessee claims that his income, dividend income is exempt. When you have 115 JB, very clearly says income which is exempt I have to exclude, expenditure in relation to that exempt income I have to exclude. So when I myself take a suo motu disallowance that look at my dividend income is 4,000 rupees and today I am seeing 500 rupees is towards earning of that exempt income, directly related expenditure under Rule 81, will it not be difficult then to argue that under MAT calculation I cannot exclude it? My view would be that though you cannot directly take Rule 80 and do the MAT, apply that to MAT computation also, but there could be situation where if you have done suo motu, you identified an expenditure and saying that this is the expenditure which I have incurred for earning the exempt income, that expenditure which is being identified by the assessee will have to be then added back to the book profit for the purpose of MAT computation. Some of the issues, if this first issue is not specifically addressed by the Supreme Court, we can only presume from its various discussion that what you have to look at is first the exempt income and then look at the expenditure. Second issue we already dealt in detail, whether it can be invoked when there is no exempt income, possibly it cannot be invoked by applying the McDonald's in the Delhi High Court. Third, whether the AO can do 14A calculation without commenting on the correctness of working of the assessee. When assessee has made a suo motu disallowance, assessee has given a working of disallowance, 14A2, 14A3, read with Rule 81, the AO will have to demonstrate the assessee is not correct and he will have to then proceed with this thing. If he makes this mistake, it works in favor of the assessee. What will be the amount disallowed when expenditure incurred is less than the expenditure determined under Rule 80? We have seen the provision there. When the disallowance can be under exempt income, we have already seen this, it cannot exceed the exempt income. Own fund, borrowed funds, mixed funds, I have already dealt that proportionality theory, how are we going to apply in the context of the new version of Rule 80, 2016 version of Rule 80 and in the context of Maxop's decision. MAT calculation also we have seen. The last point is where we have only the exempt income, this part also we have seen. So these were my views on the various Supreme Court decisions. If we have any questions, we can discuss any difference of opinion, views, or any other points that we need to emanating from these decisions. We can discuss any other questions we can take.
Section 14A heading, the way it reads is income not includable in ruling, and considering that there is no need for exempt income, rather the Delhi High Court ruling and Supreme Court ruling that's all stands diluted or it is on the wrong footing. Also considering the fact that Rule 80 sub-rule 2 states income not included in ruling, where it is not includable, here it is not included. So recent capital has appreciated this particular.
Yeah, it is, but if you look at the overall objective, why it was brought in, that the assessees are taking the benefit of having income also exempt and expenditure related to that exempt income also, and claiming that expenditure against the taxable income. The objective was never to disallow a genuine business expenditure which was otherwise allowable. The insertion of 14A was only with the objective to disallow which was in relation to exempt income. It was never with an objective to disallow which was otherwise allowable. So look at it from the other way around. In expenditure, which is satisfying all the tests of 37(1), can I apply 14A and override 37(1)? 14A doesn't open with non-obstinate clause. It doesn't say notwithstanding any other contained in any other provision. So how do you read 14A with 37(1)? So these decisions are all trying to evolve over that. And if I say that an expenditure which is otherwise detectable, can 14A override everything of that and still disallow it? So in that context, how do you look at 14A? Do you look at from the expenditures perspective or income perspective? My view would be that you look at whether there is an exempt income, and if there is no exempt income, then there should not be a disallowance. Look at the other way around. Suppose this exempt income was not exempt. Today, by virtue of 14A disallowance, and if this exempt income was taxable, I would have been possibly better off. If this exempt income was taxable today, I would have been better off. Because if this dividend income was taxable, I would have passively paid. If I look at from the expenditure perspective, that means the expenditure disallowance can be more than my exempt income. That means I am put in a worse situation than even if this income was taxable. So if we look at from that perspective, I would feel that you look at income first, and if there is an income which is exempt, which is not included in the total income, then only you bring in the disallowance under that by applying rule 8D or whatever it could be.
So how could you please clarify on income exempt under particular section versus income not taxable at all? So expenditure incurred, for these two types of income, how is it?
I do not get the question.
For example, agricultural income, there is an income which is not taxable versus section 10A.
So if you look at the words, I mean again, it is something which is not forming part of total income, which was included in the part of total income. So today if I have an agricultural income and I have an expenditure in relation to agricultural income, question is whether that expenditure I can take it and set off against the taxable income. So that would be possibly against the whole objective of 14A, which says that if my exemption or something, whatever I am giving, is on net income basis. So the agricultural income is exempt or not taxable. No doubt it is there in 10A1, but anyway, Parliament never had power or legislative power to tax it. So that is, what is that exclusion? Is it net or gross? It is net. It is not gross, because what is taxable is net, not gross. So the amendment to 14A, explanatory memorandum to provision which inserted 14A, very clearly said that our objective is to tax net and exempt net. So when I look at from that perspective, whether it is agricultural income which is anyway not taxable or an income which is exempt which is coming by virtue of section 10, they should both stand on same footing. No doubt this issue is not discussed in any of this decision, but this would be my take on your question. So with this I conclude the session. I thank you all for patient hearing. I thank you Bangalore branch for giving this opportunity to give my views on recent decisions. Thank you.
We have come to an end of first technical session, interesting session. I thank on behalf of Bangalore branch of ICA for time and sharing knowledge. May I request C.A. Siddesh to present a moment to the speaker as a token of respect and gratitude. Now we will break for tea. We will reassemble by 7:50.